Hello and welcome to the CTO Magazine interview series. I am Michael Fillios, founder and CEO of IT Ally and a CTO editorial board member. And we are partnering with CTO Magazine, MIT CTO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Nick Chaillan, former US Air Force and US Space Force Chief Software Officer and CTO Prevent Breach. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. So excited.
We're going to talk about zero trust because I know this is a concept that's developing, like you said, as a prevention, and also, companies are seeing the sophistication of these attacks occurring, and there's no silver bullet to any of this defense and weapon system, mitigation. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about zero trust as a framework for end-to-end cybersecurity. And of course, as you start talking about zero trust to our audience here, you start bleeding into the concepts of data and data security.
Yeah, no doubt.
You can maybe talk a little bit about the convergence of these two things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually started pushing zero trust, 6 years ago in partnership with Google and the Cloud Security Alliance and when I was at DHS. And so we kind of brought this very well understood concept that kind of became a buzzword and bloated a little bit, and everybody now is pretending or claiming right they're the silver bullet and doing a piece of zero trust. But I can tell you it's way too bloated, and unfortunately, if you're not careful, you can end up really confusing people. So when you really look back at what zero trust is, it's all about the denial and micro-segmentation. So first, the concept, if you don't believe in the perimeter anymore because of cloud and mobile devices and malware, that you're going to be compromised. And so based on that principle, you cannot just have a massive wall at the perimeter level with no security elsewhere to mitigate, like I said, the malicious actors to laterally move across your crown jewel. A VPN back in the day would be kind of that concept where you get access to one device on the network, then you can easily laterally move to your databases and your crown jewels, and that kind of defeat the point. So with zero trust, you're moving to three main concepts. The first one is the device enforcement. So based on the device you're using and the security of the device, whether it's for us, whether it's a government device versus a personal device or a contractor device, and based on the state of the device, if it's patched, if it has endpoint protection solutions on it, and proper updates. Okay, that's one piece of the risk, and then the second piece of the risk is the user identity enforcement. So we look at effectively, the labeling and the roles of the users. So every user can be labeled to get access to different kind of data, and also you compound that risk between the user risk and the device risk, and then you can have a compounded risk factor that decides what you're going to be able to see based on that compounded risk. And so the zero trust stack will be able to enforce that whitelisting and making sure that you cannot laterally move across things you're not supposed to see. So it's micro-segmentation, on-demand, software-defined. So it's moving to a software-defined universe, and it ties back to the data piece because we think of it as data centricity, moving to label data down to the cell level. So for us, for example, the who could be top secret, but then the what could be secret, for example, and so based on your user identity and the kind of device you're using, you will only be able to see a piece of the equation, and that's kind of how we enforce through labeling both of the data down to the granular level of the field. So not just a whole database, but really, down to a cell level, but then also assigning the right labels to users. So then you can enforce that for companies, for example, it could be, PII, PHI, financial information. You could easily label that down to fields, and then users will be assigned labels based on conditions. You could even think of conditions like time of the day, or geolocation, or the type of device being used, or the state of the device if it's updated and such. So you can create pretty granular policies to enforce that access.
Yeah, I mean, it's I would imagine for any entity, whether it's an SMB, a government, or otherwise, gathering all of that information is really the heavy lift, right? The tools will take over once you define it, but the tools are only going to be as good as the rules that you've set up in terms of that precision, access and down to that granular level that you described. So maybe as a follow-up, what did that process look like? And was this being done across the DoD and all the different agencies? Maybe just talk about the scope of the implementation.
Yeah, it is. It is actually. I was also the chief of staff, chief software officer. So I was doing the integration of what we call JADC2, which is a joint all domain command and control. So connecting kind of all the weapons together, kind of an Internet of Things nightmare, because most of these weapons were not designed to be connected ever. And now we're talking, okay, we're going to connect all this stuff magically, but you can't do that without zero trust and data centricity. At the same time, you don't want to become a massive bottleneck and having to centrally decide who gets to see what. So there's a couple of pieces. First, we open sourced all of this DevSecOps universe that we built, which is the largest contribution back to open source by the US government of about $80 million a year, 278 people full-time working on this with Platform One. And Platform One is open source and anyone can go and consume all the stuff we created. And you see dozens of commercial organizations and also other nations do that right now. And other agencies as well in the US government. So that's a massive win, and it's really a way to accelerate your journey to DevSecOps. So I'm getting a lot of banks and healthcare companies and telcos reaching out to me and say, hey, if you've been able to do this for the nuclear weapons, you can probably help us do this for banking. So we point them to this because it's a massive enabler and accelerator for those companies. That's the step number one. So you can actually reuse already some policies there as well. But then the second piece is also understanding that you need to delegate down to the right level. For example, for us, when it comes to labeling data, we delegate that down to the data owner. So that person is able to know exactly who should have access to what and how. And so then we have a pretty easy UI to use for them to assign labels. And then also, so the first step is to label data right down to the cell level. So they can say, hey, that's PII, that's PHI, that's classified, that's whatever, right? And then the second piece is, okay, under what condition does a user get access to that label? So if they create a label, that's customized to their data, they can then decide, okay, that user is going to be getting access to this date, this label based on these conditions could be, between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a US device, on the US soil. It could be all the granular rules that you want to imagine, and it's a very simple kind of UI, and the data owner can create those labels, and then it's just a matter of assigning the labels based on conditions in runtime. So it's not static. You could say, hey, if you're using a personal device, you don't get to see that data at all, but if you get to if you have a government device, for example, then you get to see it. So we can be very precise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a tremendous amount of sophistication you're talking about here. And again, coming down to a field level assignment or access on a behavior of an individual user in a particular cell just seems like a tremendous amount of work. But once that is done, obviously you can take the benefit of that for this level of precision.
And the delegation is so important, right? Because if you delegate it to the right people, that's a lot of work for, as a whole, but if you cut it into pieces and you let the data owner do it for their own data, it's actually not a lot of work for them. And then when you aggregate it, it's just a pretty easy lift, and we've done it pretty quickly. So it's also reducing your risk in terms of data sharing and understanding what kind of data you have or don't have.
Right. I was going to say there's probably a lot of byproducts of this process that benefit the organization as a result of going through this too. So you might as well maximize that effort and take full advantage of all that analysis work that you're doing. This sparks a lot of other questions for me. One of them of which is at IT Ally, we work with small businesses, right? So we're taking sort of these enterprise concepts that we all experience in Fortune 500 and are bringing those concepts to an SMB that otherwise doesn't understand what DevSecOps, doesn't even know what basic cybersecurity hygiene is in most cases. But what I think about what you're doing, have you seen the intersection of this open source come together with maybe the MSPs or the MSSPs that are serving, security services to these organizations and embracing, zero trust and embracing, some of these concepts to make their service is more reliable and robust. Are you seeing that occur aside from the large companies taking advantage of this? How do you take advantage of this great technology if you're an SMB?
Yeah, we've seen smaller businesses suddenly embrace DevSecOps, usually related to software, right? So they have a very big, important piece of the puzzle, which is, they want to still be in business 12 months from now by being able to move at the pace of relevance and being able to compete. And that's kind of the key thing to remember when it comes to DevSecOps. It's not just about security. It's going to also enable companies to find the balance between innovation and security. And if you don't find it, and if you have bottlenecks in security and it's bolted on instead of baked in, and if you struggle at delivering capabilities rapidly, that's probably the biggest foundation you can invest in. And it's honestly, for me as an investor, for example, when you look at the different pieces to pay attention to as an investment, you're going to obviously look at the team and the product. But I would argue that the maturity of the organization in DevSecOps is going to define if they're going to make it or break it in a very competitive universe. So no matter what business you are, I mean, of course, if you're in software and IT, even more obviously more important. But I think it pretty much every business is now driven through software, and you want to be able to do it efficiently. When it comes to adoption coming from partners like MSPs and others that should be bringing this to the smaller businesses, I don't see much of that yet. It's kind of too bad because it's kind of the well-known saying of Ford, right? If you ask customers what they would want faster horses. But in this case, it's almost like they're waiting for the customer to tell them they should be waking up to start providing DevSecOps services and data centricity and zero trust capabilities. So you see a lot of the focus being on the larger organization and medium-sized maybe organization, but very, very few players are taking this stuff and bringing it to the small businesses. So I guess that's a massive opportunity, right, for companies that are willing to do that, particularly when you have the government for once leading and not being 20 years behind the rest of industry and really providing it as an open source free capability that they can reuse at very little initial investment cost.
Well, I think that's a great place to end on, Nick. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your insights. I'm sure our audience is going to pick lots of golden nuggets out of this conversation today. And really thank you for taking time to join us today. And to learn more about CDO Magazine, please visit cdomagazine.tech. And thanks again, Nick, for your time. And you'll be seeing the output of this interview here shortly.
Thanks for having me.